Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Tonight, we're diving into the latest political spectacle from Russia, where Vladimir Putin has once again demonstrated his unique brand of democracy in an election that's about as fair and balanced as a one-legged man in a kickboxing match. Amidst allegations of electoral manipulation and the shadow of the Ukraine invasion, Putin's quest to solidify his rule has sparked both widespread approval and silent protests. Let's dive into the heart of Russian politics as we explore what this means for the country, its people, and the international community in the face of Putin's ever-tightening grip on power. And so, here's our latest report on the story behind this election. Let's take a look.
In the elections held in Russia from last Friday to Sunday, Vladimir Putin secured another 6-year term in a tightly controlled vote. If official data is to be trusted, the turnout was record-breaking.
That means that the turnout was record high and unprecedented. It has never been this high before. It's 77.46%.
Official results indicated Putin's victory, with more than 87% of the vote, a post-Soviet record. The incumbent was opposed by 3 relatively unknown Kremlin-friendly politicians, whose campaign was barely noticeable. Outside the country, many Russians abroad used the election as a form of protest. As back home, such acts would be impossible. Countries other than Russia were apparently the only place they could speak freely without fear of repercussions.
I don't trust Putin. I don't trust Putin team. I'm not agree with the results of this election.
Among them was Yulia Navalny, the widow of the late Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, killed in Russian prison.
There could be no any negotiations and nothing with Mr. Putin, because he is a killer, he is a gangster, he is the person who brought my country to the war and to everything.
Although no one had any doubts who was going to secure the position of Russian president, the election still showcases significant support for Putin's invasion of Ukraine and repressive policies among the Russian public.
Who am I voting for? Well, of course, for Putin. This is my president. I have been and will be for Putin.
The 71-year-old Putin, who has ruled as either president or prime minister since 2000, is now set to surpass Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin's nearly 30-year reign to become the longest-serving Russian leader in more than 2 centuries.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now, Putin has won his Kremlin-orchestrated elections in a landslide, extending his rule another 6 years as he seeks to display a veneer of popular support for his invasion of Ukraine. And by popular support, I mean the kind that's carefully manufactured in the same factories that produce those Russian nesting dolls, except each doll inside is just another Putin, all full of himself. With over 87% of the vote in his favor, Putin has set a new post-Soviet record for the state. The Central Election Commission boasted a 70% voter turnout, which in any other country might be impressive. But in Russia, it's just a reminder of how many people can't be persuaded to leave their homes under the right incentives. Let's not forget, this is Putin's first election since launching the ill-fated invasion of Ukraine, a move that has killed several tens of thousands in the country and upended countless lives. But hey, what's a little international condemnation and a few economic sanctions when you've got an election to win, right? In this tightly controlled race, Putin faced off against 3 Kremlin-friendly ghosts, candidates, and in a move as predictable as an outcome of a Scooby-Doo episode, Russian media reported plans to engineer a victory more overwhelming than his last. Because nothing says I have the support of my people like having to rig the game harder than a carnival claw machine. Now, oppositions to Putin attempted a silent protest, calling it Noon Against Putin. In the face of repressive laws, Russians line up to say, hey, we might not be able to change the outcome, but at least we can stand here and look vaguely disapproving. Meanwhile, Putin's real opponents are in jail, exile, or in the case of Alexei Navalny, dead under unclear circumstances. Nothing screams secure leader quite like eliminating all your competition. Putin's victory is therefore as surprising as finding vodka in a Russian minibar. This election wasn't about choosing the best leader, but about Putin cementing his rule and justifying his war. If he completes this term, he'll surpass Joseph Stalin as Russia's longest-serving leader. And hey, one can only hope he'll exit the Kremlin in the same way. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Zygmunt Dzięciołowski, the founding editor of Open Democracy Russia. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Always a pleasure to be with you.
So, my first question would be, how surprised were you at the Russian election results?
There was no element of surprise at all. Everything went as could have been predicted, and the figures that were released by the Russian Central Election Commission are absolutely predictable, maybe even higher than we expected, because they led us to believe that out of 77% voters who took part in the election, nearly 90%, 87 I think, that these figures change, but nearly 87 voted for Putin. Well, I'm always upset and sort of nervous when speaking about this spectacle which we witnessed in Russia, we were using the term election.
Right.
Election, this is something we had in Poland in October. That was something different. Several competing political parties, they nominated competing candidates, they had different programs and agendas. That was real election. The Russian spectacle can hardly be called election because we had only Vladimir Putin, and the whole purpose of this operation was to sort of demonstrate popular, massive support of the whole nation for the beloved leader. It's a little bit like in North Korea.
Right.
Because, well, look, there were three competing candidates. They were puppets, so to say. They were not real politicians. They were not people who, out of their own will or consciously felt they were good candidates for the post of the president of Russia. There was a fellow nominated by the Communist Party, whose name was Haritonov. There was a person from the Liberal Democratic Party, so-called official opposition, which is present in the parliament, Mr. Słutsky, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Russian parliament. So another puppet, you know. Right. He's just there, and there was Mr. Davankov, who represented a fairly new party called New People, Nowi Ludzie, and he was also a puppet. All three of them, each of them was able to receive about 3-4% of the vote, and this is not the first time in the history of Russian presidential elections when candidates running against Putin declare openly that they are not willing to become presidents. That makes this spectacle even more funny because neither of those candidates honestly wanted to be a president. And what's the point to run in the presidential election when you don't want to be a president? Because you get an order from the Kremlin.
Right.
The Kremlin tells you, listen, you have to run, so you run.
You brought up a very good point that we here in a Western democracy look at the word election in very different ways that it is perceived in Russia. And we're almost using that for a lack of a better term because of what's happening. So this brings me to the question, like you mentioned earlier, what's the point of running if there's a clear winner? And what's the whole purpose of still doing the sham election when he knows, everyone knows, and he knows that we all know that this is a sham?
He needs, every 6 years, I believe, he still believes that he needs some kind of spectacle which gives him more legitimacy, which is a demonstration of popular support. This is solidarity with him or support for him. He needs. I think he doesn't need it. He doesn't. This is not a spectacle targeting the audience out of Russia, because these people, he knows what we know, that it's sham election, so he doesn't have that illusion. But he needs this spectacle to mobilize people, to tell them, listen, I am the number one, I am here forever, I will not go away, and we are on the right path, and we And all those who are against, I mean, they are not part of our nation. Now our nation is united. Our nation has clear set of political aims. We know where we are going to. And every 6 years, he needs this kind of mass, absolutely mass spectacle. It's mass. You have it on the television, you have posters, you have concerts, you have at polling stations, you have food and entertainment, and here in Poland, you know, we had this kind of spectacle in the communist times. So we also knew that what's the point of this election? We know that the final end would be the same, but these autocratic powers is something very interesting. I found out that even in North Korea, right, which is for us a symbol of autocracy, totalitarian autocracy, there are 3 different political parties which take part in the election. Right. All these schemes need this election, also because these authoritarian regimes need this huge demonstration. We are here forever, and you have to be with us.
So this sounded more like one of those military parade or celebration rather than an actual true democratic process. And this also brings me to another question of like how the Russian diaspora or the Russians outside of the country kind of see this whole thing. Do they feel like they're participating in any sort of democratic process, or do they feel obligated to participate in this sort of spectacle that Putin's trying to put up?
There was serious discussion among different factions of the Russian political opposition, both in exile and also some people also in Russia took part in this discussion. And there were 2 wings. One wing said, listen, this is a sham election. There is no point to go and take part because whatever we tick in the ballot box, it doesn't have any sense. But there were other people, especially Navalny people, who and also there is an opposition activist whose name is Maxim Katz, quite popular figure. He's abroad, but he's very popular blogger, and he has his supporters in Russia, especially among young people. They believe that some kind of popular demonstration will have at least some kind of psychological, psychotherapeutical effect. That's this action known against Putin. On the third day of the election, as we remember, Russian presidential election was scheduled to take part during 3 days. So the final day of the election was yesterday, on Sunday, and at noon, they appealed to voters who were against Putin to go to the polling stations, and just exactly at the same time. And it had some effect. We could see some lines, and they were mostly young people. And they were young people who came not to demonstrate their support for Putin. They came there in order to support their solidarity with like ones, the people with similar attitudes, and that was encouraging, I must say. That was to some degree encouraging, but of course it didn't have any political effect. That is just this is just demonstration more for ourselves, you know, that we are many. There are other people who think like us.
Right, and I think it's also very telling the way they choose to demonstrate, right? When we look at any sort of legitimate opposition figure or people who are more outspoken against Putin, they get arrested, they get prosecuted right on the spot. And I think the way that they show to protest, to show up at noon, such a benign and peaceful move, which means so much to them, also shows how oppressive the regime is, that the only choice they have is to show up at a certain time.
That was smart, of course. That was smart because if people stand in line to the polling station, you can't really persecute them or repress them for anti-government activities or counter-revolutionary or something. You just have to. And even Putin, he was asked yesterday at this improvised press conference. He was asked, "What about these people who came to the opposition? Appealed to them to come to polling station at noon." This is very good because I also appeal to people to take part in the voting. But that was smart, and that was good sort of act of auto-psychotherapy, I would say. But it wouldn't have any political influence.
Right, and I think it is important for us in the Western media to highlight the fact that these lines that we're seeing, especially in the foreign embassies, Russian embassies in foreign countries, is actually those people who are showing solidarity, who are in opposition of Vladimir Putin, because we already see kind of misinformation coming out and the Russian media trying to use this line to showcase how popular the support for Putin is, and this is like, look, the turnout rate is so great even outside the country.
Look, I saw a short clip from London. I think BBC interviewed a woman who expressed her support for Putin, says, listen, Putin is the best president we have, and I'm here to vote for him. So, the stats are pretty simple. This is about 270,000 Russian nationals who voted out of Russia. 270,000 out of 70 million something. Okay. And also we have to remember that not all Russian nationals who live abroad are opposition members. You have a lot of support for Putin among emigrant Russian communities in Germany and in America. You'd be surprised talking to many Russians. Russians are for Trump, and many Russians who live in America are for Putin, because Putin represents power of their country. They are not intellectual opposition members who want democracy, liberal democracy, and discussion and different political views and agendas. No, for quite a large percentage. In Israel, you would also find among Russian immigrants, Jews who emigrated from Russia or from Ukraine, there would be quite a serious percentage of those who sort of see Putin as somebody who represents the power of Russia. And this has some meaning for them. It's important.
Right, so yeah, it does seem like a very complicated matter to unpack. However, we do see that the results, like we said, in this sham election, and we'll have to keep observing what happens next for the country. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate your input and insight. And thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the latest stories from the East that you don't want to miss. The leaders of Germany, France, and Poland met in Berlin last week to discuss ways of providing greater support for Ukraine. One of the announced approaches would involve providing more military equipment for Kyiv, including using frozen Russian assets to finance armed purchases.
Last week, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk held a meeting of the Weimar Triangle, a regional forum which brings the three countries together, but has been somewhat mere-bound in recent years. This latest meeting, however, has shown that the format is very much alive. The leaders agreed on the need to procure more arms for Ukraine on the global market and boost the production of military equipment, including through cooperation with partners in Ukraine. Interestingly enough, the leaders decided to finance the efforts using Russian assets frozen in Europe, a move that for now everyone was rather hesitant to do. European support for Kyiv has become increasingly key as US President Joe Biden has been unable to get the big Ukraine aid package through Congress, and much of his administration's foreign policy energy is focused on the war in Gaza.
Every now and then, a country will announce the uncovering or arrest of Russian spies working within its borders, reaffirming once again that Moscow's foreign intelligence operations remains in full swing. Now, the Swiss Federal Intelligence Service is saying that Switzerland serves as a primary hub for coordinating Russian intelligence operations in Europe.
Estimates say that over one-third of Russian diplomatic personnel in Switzerland, totaling more than 70 individuals, are working for Russian security services. The Swiss consider Russian intel services to be posing one of the greatest security threats to the country, especially in light of recent scandals and Moscow's cyber espionage efforts. Despite other European countries expelling Russian diplomats over espionage concerns, Switzerland has not followed suit and remains focused on countering Russian operations. The number of accredited Russian diplomats in Switzerland has remained steady, over 70 of which are suspected of working for Russian intelligence. Peter Regali, a former Swiss intelligence chief, suggests that this figure likely underestimates the extent of Russian intelligence activities in Switzerland, with a significant portion of Russian diplomats assumed to be involved in intelligence work.
Ever since the onset of the war in Ukraine, there's been a heated debate over allowing Russian athletes in participation of the Olympics. Now, with the Summer Games around the corner, the debate is back front and center, with the international community criticizing the IOC for its decision to allow the Russians to compete.
The International Olympic Committee's decision to allow Russian athletes to participate in the Games, despite condemning Russia's actions in Ukraine, has drawn strong criticism from Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has accused the IOC of disregarding Russian war crimes and allowing athletes to compete under a neutral flag. Similar criticism and concerns have been voiced by the foreign ministers of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Although IOC Vice President John Coates is uncertain about the number of Russian athletes competing as neutrals, he suggests it could be as low as 40 due to tight restrictions, including following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Interestingly enough, French President Emmanuel Macron announced in an interview that Russia will be urged to observe a ceasefire in Ukraine during the Paris Olympics, a move Russian president said would be open to consider.
As voting in the Russian presidential election was underway this weekend, a man threw 2 Molotov cocktails onto the premises of the Russian embassy in the capital of Moldova, Chisinau. The perpetrator was later apprehended by the police.
In Moldova, a man was arrested by law enforcement after allegedly throwing 2 Molotov cocktails at the Russian embassy, as voting in the presidential election was in progress at the facility. Reports said that the embassy in Chisinau, Moldova's capital, was targeted and that the incident did not lead to any injuries. The 54-year-old Moldovan, who also holds Russian citizenship, was swiftly detained and is being questioned. Police have said that the man cited dissatisfaction with Russian authorities as his motive. The relations between Moldova and Russia are tense, to say the least, with fears that the latter might attempt a hostile takeover. Moldova has recently protested against Moscow's decision to open polling stations in separatist Transnistria during the election, preferring that voting be restricted to the Russian embassy in Chisinau.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.